Greetings, greetings. I am here today to talk about the new moon or the full moon, sorry, that's happening in Capricorn. There is so much astrology swirling in the collective right now that even I am full of planets and the things that the planets are doing. And sometimes it can be hard to keep all of the different movements um, straight when there's so much movement happening. So instead of doing just one video transmission this month, I decided that I would do a few and break down some of the big happenings. So before this video was posted, I made a video about the nodal axis shift, which is a very big change. It'll be happening during this kind of like full moon to new moon portal. So I thought it was really important to get that pieced up because it's just a huge collective shift for us. And what's interesting is that this full moon happens to be squaring the new nodal axis points in the zodiac by sign. And so having a little bit of background about what the Aries Libra axis is about might be helpful for the interpretation, although I'll bring some of those flavors in. So doesn't really matter where you start in terms of astrological transmissions. You'll get a lot out of both of them. So let's just get right into it by pulling up the full moon chart in Capricorn. Here we go. And I'm going to see if I can kind of put this mouse spotlight on. And that way, as I point to things, you'll be able to see them. Excellent. Okay. So this is the full moon chart for July 3rd, full moon in Capricorn. We see that the sun is in Cancer. And whenever we're looking at a full moon, we're really looking at this is a zodiacal axis because the sun is in one side and it is reflecting light off of the sign that's opposite from it. So we're really looking at like a polarity here. So beginning with the full moon in Capricorn. So this is a moon that is in the sign of Saturn, in Saturn's feminine domicile. What is Saturn about? Saturn and Capricorn are about growing up, taking responsibility, a sense of duty, that capacity to mature, the ability to have refinement that comes from discipline, the idea of quality. There's that archetype of climbing a mountain and getting to the summit and being able to look over our life and all of the things that we've achieved. Therefore, Capricorn is concerned with legacy. It's a sign that represents closed systems. So we can think of it like hierarchies, governments, corporations, anything that's closed, or, even like the good old boys club. Some people associate it with the patriarchy, as Saturn is like the archetype of the patriarch. And so we're really looking here at a sign that represents kind of the center of the collective, right? Whereas Aquarius, where's my mouse here? Here's Aquarius. Aquarius rules the things that have left the closed systems and are pushing out at the edges, the exiles, the progressives, the artists, the people who want progress and who are kind of fighting the closed system to have more of an egalitarian, humanitarian outlook on life, or to move society forward. They're on the edges, pushing on the edges to move us in a specific direction, aka into the future. And generally, there's a little bit of tension between them and the closed system. We can also see Capricorn a little bit like our conditioning and our ingrained patterns. Saturn is related to crystallization and Capricorn to hierarchy. And this isn't really a comfortable place for the moon because of that. There's this element of Saturn and especially Capricorn that is like fallow, where life goes inward. There's this sort of involution. And because it's opposite of Cancer, the temple of the moon, that kind of space that's all growing and all nourishing, that sense of the mother, or that idea of unconditional love and attachment, where the mother is cradling the baby in the arms and breastfeeding. There's this sense of growth and warmth and security in this place. Capricorn is like the dead of winter. It's like the time of hibernation, where the ground lays fallow and things are not growing. And so that's kind of the tension that this full moon lives inside of, right? So themes that are on the agenda for this full moon is looking at places where we are like out of responsibility or out of right relationship with our lives and failing to take responsibility somewhere. There's a theme of maturity, and the closed systems may end up kind of bucking their heels up, because this is the full moon, and the full moon is kind of like a really punched up energy to begin with. And wherever the full moon resides, we tend to have a magnification of energy. And we'll see, like, there's so many themes that are playing out in this full moon. One, the collective attention is here at the nodal axis and moving into the sign of Aries soon. So during the portal of this full moon, like we said, the nodal axis will be moving into the Aries Libra sign. So this nodal axis is really the place where we're focused on our evolutionary story, our evolutionary journey, and where we are kind of forced to make edits. The places where we might be out of alignment with where our soul contracts are leading us, the nodal axis will kind of highlight those things that aren't in alignment and push us to get more into alignment. If we do a lot of spiritual work, that can be a very subtle and almost even enjoyable process. But for people who are really not concerned with the evolution of their soul and not highly engaged in that work, sometimes the nodal axis happenings can be quite abrupt, right? They can come out of nowhere, and it feels sort of like the universe is pushing them. That's why it's always good to sort of be engaged in your evolutionary journey and working with it in a very evocative and co-creative way, because that way when the big shifts happen, we tend to have an orientation to them like they are somehow in service to us, and we approach them as lessons, and we are grateful for them even though there's a challenge, right? So speaking of challenge, this axis, the Capricorn Cancer axis, is squaring the nodal axis. And it would be kind of a stretch to say that the full moon is squaring the nodes. That's a very wide square, even though I don't mind using a wide, what we call orb. It's an aspect pattern, a square, and the orb is like how many degrees apart the square would be. So for a perfect square, the nodes would have to be at 11 degrees Aries, but the energy of Aries is going to be highlighted because the sign itself is squaring the moon. And so the evolutionary energy is tracking that way. It's not quite in the midst of that sign, but a square pattern creates a challenge, right? And so we could say, though, that Chiron is squaring the full moon, even though, again, it's a wide orb. And it's not in this chart, but there is an asteroid called Cassandra who is at 10 degrees Libra, and that body is squaring the full moon. And so what does Libra have to do with? And we covered this and why it might be nice for you to go back if you're really interested in looking deeper at, how this nodal axis manifests in your own life at the video that I did before this. But Aries is about self. It's that divine spark of life that resides in us. It's like the Gnostics they used to, or they still do say, that each person is imbued in their soul with the divine spark of life, and that we each carry a piece of the divine within us. And so if we look at Pisces, right? So this is kind of the liminal waters that we travel on our way into this incarnation and on our way out. And then when we get to Aries, we're given this divine spark, and it's a point of separation in a sense from like the union, the all, the one. And we become an ensouled being, and the divine spark is then placed within us. And so Aries really has to do with the essence of who we are and that principle of I am. And so we could call that the self, right? And then Libra, the axis across from that, has to do with other, how others see us, our relationship with other, our relationships with people. There is like the concept of mirroring comes up in Libra. Libra is ruled by Venus, so there's a sense of attunement and relationship here, attraction. Venus works like glue, so there's this like point of coming together. And Venus is really, I think, especially in Libra, most expressed in relationship to other. She is concerned with balance and harmony, right? And so some of the shadow side of that can be like codependence and people pleasing, because when we want balance and harmony and we're actually concerned with that as an issue, we'll go into a group or into a relationship dynamic, maybe kind of shifting who we are in order to bring peace and harmony to the dynamic itself. And so that's why Aries is such an important thing to look at inside of this axis, because it speaks to us of the divine spark and who we are. And I think, the most evolved or exalted way of looking at the Aries Libra axis is that kind of principle of namaste, or to say it in astrological terms, it might be best said, the essence in me acknowledges the essence in you. And Aries is really who we are, no additions, no subtractions. And so there's this tension inside of Aries and Libra, this axis. There's this like evolutionary tension that asks us to be able to show up in situations, backing our own essence, bringing our own essence forward with authority, right? And not negotiating or compromising the essence self, but still having the capacity to be in connection with other people, having interdependence rather than codependence, and being able to bring your frequency forward in such a way that it doesn't cause disharmony and disruption. And of course, we know through conditioning, this is quite a feat, like once we bring in all our traumas and all of the things that have happened to our inner children and all of the ways that we've been conditioned by the world, it's sort of difficult to find the essence self buried under all of that, right? And like who we finally show up as when we make it to the seventh house or to Libra is this amalgamation of all of these relationships, traumas, conditionings, right? Like education, indoctrination, having been propagandized, like there's all of this stuff that the essence self is buried under. And part of the the journey of the soul and the journey of the human is to incarnate, to get this divine spark, to be imbued with the divine spark, to go through the process of being acculturated, of having our first culture be in our home, having the conditioning kind of heaped upon us, right? Being influenced by other people, and then kind of being lost inside of that, right? Like that's part of the human journey. And then, as Jung would say it, a process of individuation then happens, or it's supposed to happen, where we then go in and recover the divine spark within us, but that on the same hand, culture and living in community or in tribes is also really important. So there's a tension there that we can see. So the question becomes like, who do I show up as in relationship? Can I bring my essence self forward? And can I meet the essence self in other people? Because one of the kind of shadow sides of Libra is expecting people to show up in archetypal purity or projecting archetypal purity onto the world and not meeting other people in their essence self as fallible, kind of messy human beings. So now that I've laid out this kind of what we call cardinal cross here with the full moon and new moon, or sorry, the full moon and the sun in the Cancer and Capricorn signs, and the node shifting after the full moon into Aries and Libra, I think these are going to be really important energies that come up for us, especially with this square to Chiron. One of the things that we have seen in the collective, and I just feel so called to speak to this, and I want to do it with as much respect and nuance as possible. But I think it is so important when we consider that Aries is the divine spark. It's the moment of ensoulment where the soul becomes attached to who we are, right? Like there's this moment of our essence being placed into a soul. That's Aries. And it has so much to do with that principle of I am who I am. And Chiron, who's in Aries right now and has been in Aries since 2018, is the archetype of the wounded healer. And his archetypal story is really interesting. Chiron was born of Saturn, right? That was his father. And when Saturn saw him, and his mother was Philyra. So when Saturn saw him, he was horrified that he was a centaur, right? Like there was something wrong with his body. And so Saturn wanted to kill Chiron. He wanted his wife Philyra, or his consort Philyra, to get rid of him. And she was able to kind of steal her son away and put him on the side of Mount Pelion in a cave and hide him from Saturn so Saturn wouldn't murder him. And she then had to do away with herself. So she transformed herself into a laurel tree and sat watch outside of this cave as Chiron grew up. So Chiron being outside of culture, never having entered into like the mainstream and had that process of becoming conditioned, never having had a family, never having had any of those things, just kind of abandoned, right? And left on the side of a cave. He grew up quite like a hermit. He became very good at distilling medicines, creating medicines, and kind of like a plant medicine doctor. And in the meantime, as Chiron was growing up, Jupiter became the leader of the gods. He displaced Saturn as ruler. And Jupiter noticed Chiron, and he noticed his mastery. And there was something really special about this mastery. And Jupiter noticed, I think, that this is Zeus, Jupiter, that Chiron's mastery was a product of not having been conditioned. And he so appreciated and had reverence for what he could do, he decided that he'd send his children to Chiron. And so Chiron became the mentor to the gods. Through this process of having been abandoned and left kind of in this separated from culture state, he developed the skills to bring out the godlike qualities in others. Like, I think that's such a beautiful kind of mythology there, that like our having been outside of culture gives us the sight and the medicine to be able to work with others and bring out their godlike qualities. So Chiron does that for a really long time, but he is getting depressed because he never had the opportunity to be with any of his own people. And so after he retires from being a mentor, he ends up um, finding a group of centaurs to hang out with. And these centaurs were having kind of a centaur revolution. You can kind of think of this like as almost like a social justice movement. They wanted rights for the centaur. And so um, Chiron joined them in their army or their little militia as they went and they fought these battles. And in one of the battles, Chiron was hit with an arrow dipped in Hydra's blood. And everyone knows that if you get injured with something that's dipped in Hydra's blood, that wound will never heal. And so he then suffered for the rest of his life, being this incredible wise elder and medicine man, and living with this painful open wound that would not heal. It gave Chiron the moniker of the wounded healer. And so I love a lot of the symbolism inside of that. And we can see, in a sense, that Chiron moved into Aries in 2018. And around that same time, an identity movement began. And Aries really is the sign of like our deep soul identity, right? And that movement is an outcropping of the LGBTQ movement. And I so want to say at the beginning here, like my son is in that community. I have absolutely no issues with, how someone truly from a soul level wants to identify. I think that's a deeply private soul journey that people go on. And at the same time, I do see signs of that kind of movement, in a sense, having been hijacked in a way. And it's like special interest groups have gotten involved. I recently, and this is what clued me into it, and then I've done a little bit of research to see where this is actually true. There was an article that came out that said that they were doing a study at Johns Hopkins, and they were working to identify babies as soon as they're born. And I asked my son, do you think this is useful for your community? And he's like, no, this really is a whole journey that the soul goes on. I accompanied my son on this journey, and he's like, no, there's this whole thing about really an important part of this soul journey is the capacity to experiment, right? The capacity to, have friction and bump up against our edges and get to know ourselves through different contrasting things. And so being labeled at such a young age, he thought might be harmful. And I quite agree with that. And so I was interested in why they would be putting money into this study. I held it as a kind of pebble in my shoe. And then I kept more and more seeing like where companies were doing advertisement and it felt like they were kind of using the LGBTQ group as a way to advertise, like to show like we're allies, but it didn't feel true. And I think the important thing in this conversation is to, really be feeling for where the frequency of truth is. And so this like co-opting his community to make money felt just really gross to me. I didn't like that at all. And the conversation in the collective has changed so much. Now I have younger kids who are growing and developing inside of this kind of collective conversation about identity that I think is potentially so harmful. And I had been listening to and I can't remember who it is, someone talk, and I thought that this was such an illuminating insight. They said, this kind of movement and the way it's being magnified. So you think about the percentage of people who like authentically are expressing as alternative to the binary gender system that we have. It's a very small percentage. It's like 1%, maybe less. And the magnification of the issue, like it's just everywhere. So it's not proportionate to the population that's actually experiencing an authentic or having an authentic experience like this. And so again, that made me curious. And the thing that I heard someone say is that because we have such a lack of grounded spirituality and understanding of our divine origins, that essentially what children are doing and young people are doing is looking for a soul, right? Inside of like these different, they're searching for a soul, and these different, they're trying on different identities to try and feel and find where their soul is. And of course that made me sad, and it makes so much sense, because if we as adults aren't rooted in our own soul and our own embodiment and connected to our own truth, and we don't have our own kind of capacity to translate our own spiritual philosophy and our own embodiment and truth to our children, and to help them come into that on them, themselves, then they end up searching for it out there, like in the external world, in the collective. And while I don't think that there's anything wrong with experimenting, I think that that was really highly useful and very insightful information that my son gave me. And I can see the truth of that absolutely as being an important part of the journey. And even having perhaps space held for that is okay. But what is happening is that there's this way that we, instead of holding space, we're doing this like affirmation right away, and then there becomes a crystallization around the identity. And I'm concerned, like I wanted to hold space for my son to be whatever he ended up being. And so if he was going to end up being gay, that's fine. But he experimented, and I don't want to tell too much of his story here. And so there were a couple girls before he came out, and so I wanted to hold space for him to be bi. And so the issue is for me is that if we're jumping to affirmation rather than holding space, and we're jumping to not doing a whole lot of exploration with children and allowing them to bump up against their own edges, and yet we're helping them to crystallize in this identity as a very young age, what is that really doing? And is there potential for any of this to be just a process of development and individuation for the child? And so would it not be wise, like real wisdom, to potentially spend more time exploring with the child, and definitely leaving that up to the parents? And so I know this is such a charged topic to talk about. There are so many people with so many vast opinions, and the opinions themselves have gotten militant, and like it's just outsized. And it's very real in the astrology. We can see that this issue is up for conversation. And what concerns me is more the crystallization, like more that this is the way it is, and we can't ask any questions, and we can't be curious about it. We just have to follow what this movement says. And I think we're going to see this come to a head as Chiron makes his conjunction to Eris, who is the goddess of chaos and discord. I think we'll see it come to head through some kind of chaotic upheaval, and then hopefully come back into alignment. And where I hope the focus shifts is to creating environments where children are brought up really understanding that piece of the divine spark and understanding that their soul is placed into the body that it's placed into for a reason. Now, whether or not that's to go on a journey of exploration like my son did, that's not for me to say, but like if any part of this, and there's been stories of, and I'm not political, I like to look at both sides. It's so much fun to really zoom lens out and kind of like look at like what is this group saying and what is this group saying. And I promise you that the nature of the universe is about balance. And so that's why polarity, duality is a teaching tool. And so, not that any of this is necessarily wrong, but that nature always seeks balance in the end. It may not look balanced to you, so it won't be like static balance or two exact things that balance out. It may kind of look a little wonky, but there will have been this balancing effect. And Jung called the imbalance in service to balance something called enantiodromia. And so that's like the wild swing out of balance and then this coming back into balance. And that farthest out pole is the function of needing enantiodromia to end up in the middle. And so I sort of see that that's what's happening. And at the same time, I want to keep my eye on it because, and this is an if, and I just bring this up because it's another conversation in the collective. If there is, and considering that Pluto is moving into Aquarius, I'd say that the thought form definitely exists. And I wouldn't be at all surprised as if this is the truth. I try not to crystallize around things just so I can remain open-minded. But if there is an agenda of transhumanism, right? The only way to get people to go along with that agenda is to divorce them from their soul. And so if there is a propagated or propagandized, outsized, magnified movement that is sending messages out into the collective that destabilizes the connection between people and their soul, it then becomes easier to hijack us because we're void of our soul for really any agenda whatsoever that they want to implement. And so that's why this piece of Aries isn't one we can skip over. You know, it's one of the most important pieces in the journey of the life is attaching the soul to the body and making sure it stays there. There is a way. I mean, when we look at like, so Pisces, I talked about it as that liminal realm of where the waters we travel in and out of this world. And when people get lost in addiction, I've seen this with my son Tanner, there's this way that the soul is sort of pulling away from their body. There's this longing to be reconnected with the divine. There's this feeling of sort of being so lost that the soul kind of wants to leave the body and merge in that way. And I have observed this, so I can say that it is a true thing. I've experienced it myself as a human. And if you really think about it, we've all probably gone through periods in which we have ourselves felt, like that we have felt like our soul is kind of flown away. I know in moments of shock, we feel that. So to suggest that there is a possibility of the soul being separated from the body, I think it's a very real thing. I think that we have some very juvenile or adolescent ideas about spirituality in the collective. We're moving from dogmatic religion, and then new age pop culture spirituality has popped up, and that's not grounded at all. And I'm hoping that Saturn and Pisces can help to rectify some of that. But there is this real sense of young people really not being very centered in themselves. And that's just a really important piece. Now, if you have done that work, if you as a parent or you as a person have done that work, and then you choose to express, I mean, there's oddities, I don't know if that's the word I want to use. There's so much queerness in nature. So it's not like I think it's outside of divine law to have someone express as differently than our binary gender system. I don't think that at all. But I do think that it seems like the people who are pushing this kind of narrative are not invested in the souls of the children or of the souls of the people that they're pushing the narrative onto. Like I said, there was corporations who are using like Pride Month to make money. They're interested in making money. And so we have to do that work. It's just the most fundamental work that we can do as humans is this Aries work. And so Chiron, as he's traveling through the sign of Aries, is really illuminating this kind of need. It's like there's been this destabilization of identity and this kind of like quaking of where does the soul fit into the body. I could feel it happening. I mean, so Chiron moved in there in 2018, and this was kind of like when the collective got completely hijacked by political narratives. There was, it felt like almost no one I knew was not invested in some kind of political narrative. And when we're inside of a political narrative, we are inside of a thought form. It's really important to kind of have the capacity. I mean, I agree with a lot of different political ideologies and on both sides. I don't have an allegiance to one side or the other, but I don't ascribe or belong to one group and take on their ideas as my own. When we do that, we give up another theme of the Aries Libra axis is freedom, sovereignty. It's Aries is ruled by Mars, and so we give up our capacity to really be individual when we join those dogmatic groups. So anyways, I've gone off on a really long tangent now, but there's this full moon squaring Chiron, and I think that is, it may potentially bring up some issue around that, around how the more traditional factions, because Saturn rules tradition and conservation and the conservation of values and morals and stuff like that. And this Chiron idea, I don't think that Chiron is the archetype of identity. I think he brings up the issue of the wound of identity when he's in the sign of Aries. And so I think there'll be this tension. And then, like I said, we have Cassandra, the asteroid, at 10 degrees of Libra. And she, if you remember, for those who follow me, she is she was a goddess of Apollo. She was like a goddess in the temple of Apollo, and Apollo took a shine to her. She caught his eye, and he really liked her, and so he wanted to kind of get with her, right? And so in trying to seduce her, he gave her the gift of prophecy. And after a while, she rebuffed him. His advances were unwelcome, and she let him know. And so for rebuffing him, he cursed her to always be able to speak the truth, but to never have anyone believe her. And so it's like, a lot of us have had that experience of we're speaking the truth, we're pointing to something, and no one believes us or no one can hear us. And if you've ever like gone to the doctor with a complaint and been told, yeah, it's not what you think it is, it's psychosomatic or whatever, you've had that experience of knowing something that's true, seeing something that was true clearly, and then not being believed. And I think that is something that I've seen in the collective regarding even this identity piece, I've seen people who really seem to have extraordinarily good intentions and are concerned about where that piece is taking us, especially with young people. And um and they are being like just called right-wing extremist and dismissed, right? So that was where that piece came up for me, because I'm like, no, this person's very thoughtful when they speak. I can hear them. Like, I can't hear rhetoric that is tinged in bigotry. I can't be with that. And there is a lot of that, like where it's going to the extreme on one side, and then the other side to counterbalance that, remember, this is the enantiodromia, is like this militant, well, we don't have to listen to you and we'll write you off, and therefore we can't have a discussion. I mean, where do you meet when there are people who are telling the truth but they aren't believed? Like how do you have a discussion about reality in those cases? So I think, one of the things with the full moon being in Capricorn is this idea of maturity, and the need to really be able to sit down and have open, thought provoking, sourced in love dialogue about some of the issues that are facing humanity. And right now, all we do is fight and name call and act like adolescents. And so I'm hoping that, part of this, having all of these different placements at critical degrees, and we went over some of this at the past new moon in Gemini, what the critical degree means, and you can go back and watch that video. I actually made that video public. Agree, like these critical degrees are telling us that something is quaking. It's like the birth canal, right, of the place that the energy is at. Something is quaking, and if we don't grow up in the capacity, our own capacity, to meet the challenge of that, we are going to be in trouble. And so, like, we've got Pluto at 29 degrees. We have the ascendant here of the full moon chart at 0 degrees Leo. And what is Leo? Leo is the radiant heart of the king. It's got a lot to do with self and the capacity to be seen, which is what I think this wound is sort of sourced in, aside from the not feeling as though we're a soul in a body. If you don't feel as though your soul is deeply rooted in your body, how will you ever feel seen? How can anyone ever validate you? And Leo really is about that, like that radiant big heart and the courage to go and be big and be seen and play and be out and be innocent and be in your joy. And when you are feeling psychically broken because there is a detachment or this feeling of a longing for your soul to come home, do you see where I'm going with this? Like, we've got to start really doing some wise, deep spiritual work again. I think there was a point in time in which Christianity could have been really beautiful and really could have served as that. And for a lot of people did. Like, I think that we are really hard on Christianity, and rightfully so. But I think for a lot of people, it has been a really beautiful religion, especially people who aren't super dogmatic. Like my in-laws, what I love about them, they're from Palestine, and the Orthodox Church was born there. And the Orthodox Church is a lot like Aries. The no additions, no subtractions is something I actually got from, I converted to Orthodoxy when I married my husband. And I was just a Congregationalist as a child growing up. But in my kind of classes in the conversion classes, the priest had said to me, we are Christianity with no additions and no subtractions. And if you were to meet my in-laws, like, they are just the most loving, lovely people. Orthodox Christianity is highly mystical. Yes, of course, there's some dogma there, like the church proclaims stuff and isn't always very progressive, but they are. They actually are as people. They don't live this super dogmatic life at all. Their life doesn't revolve around rules and dogma. It revolves around the emergent current of love that embodies Christ's consciousness. And so I came to them as a single mother with two kids. One of those children is gay, right? So I was a harlot, maybe in some people's eyes. And they welcomed me with open arms and have loved me unconditionally since the moment we met. And they've always been very open and accepting. They don't feel like things are their business, to comment on unless, it has to do with our thriving and our well-being. And even when they do comment, they do it with so much love. And so that's what I mean. I think that that kind of spirituality is lacking. Everything is so extreme right now. And you're going to have that when you've got planets at these crisis degrees. And we are going through the shift of ages from Pisces to Aquarius. I mean, we're in the midst of that. It's not a one-day event. It happens over a period. It's like a phase change. So we're just, we incarnated, the people who are here now incarnated to be pillars of light, to be the people on earth during this phase change. So we have to really understand that we have a mission, purpose, and intention here. Like we have to ground the energy for the new generations coming in. And if we aren't fully embodied, if our soul isn't fully attached, it is so easy to hijack us with an agenda that we don't want. And we live in a binary system. So it would be foolish and like putting on rose-colored glasses to think that there aren't nefarious forces at work, that we're not, I don't know that I love the idea or the word spiritual war, but there's always that going on. There is always bad actors and good actors. And so, I mean, I have hopefully come to a resolution point. I'm not sure I'll ever be perfect at it, but like with really looking at my own rescuer, savior archetype within myself. So do I think that I can save humanity? No, but I think I can do my own work and do my own part and affect my own little corner of the universe. And if a lot of people are doing something similar, it can have a real impact. And I do think on my own part, from a karmic perspective, that I am sort of in somehow, some way, I don't know if the word is responsible, but I know that I do affect the next 7 generations that are born from me, right? And so that's a big deal. That's sacred duty, Capricorn, right? There's something really important about lineage and ancestors along this Cancer Capricorn axis. And so, all of this last spiel I've been talking about is very Capricornian in nature. And so I really feel like this full moon is about like really stepping into our responsibility as humans, as adults, to stop thinking that the problems are everybody else's or that the government or some other authority is going to be the solution when we ourselves are the solution. And so these are kind of the energies. I'm going to leave the planets, Venus, Mars, Neptune, Pluto. I'm going to leave those for another transmission because Venus is changing. She's in her phase change to begin a new cycle. And I want to do a whole other video on that. And I've spoken for a long time. And I feel like we really did hit on the themes of responsibility, duty, that 7 generations, being grown up, approaching things maturely, and then the axis of Aries and Libra is all really important. So I'm going to leave it there for now. And we'll come back and talk more about some of these other planets. They don't, I'd kind of have to change topics to get into that. And so instead of doing that here, we'll do that on another video. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Much love.